This is the Non-Tech Podcast, conversations about education, technology, and culture, with Dr. Doug Reed and Dr. Matt Stranick. Thank you for joining us.
My name is Dr. Doug Reed, and I am located in Abagway, the traditional and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people.
My name is Dr. Matthew Stranick, and I am located in Menakwisk in St. John, New Brunswick, which is situated on the traditional and unceded territory of the Wolastoqiyik Maliseet people. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 89 of the Non-Tech Podcast. I am Matt Stranick. This is Dr. Doug Reed, and we are stoked and thrilled and stoked to be with you here. And it is entering pretty significantly the holiday time. The winter solstice is but 2 weeks away at this point, give or take, and depending on when you're watching this, I should say. And really, here in Atlantic Canada, we've had some pretty significant weather, at least in my part of Atlantic Canada. It's been freezing cold, just unseasonably even for this time of year, which is significant. There's been snow, which typically would dissipate, but because of the sudden low temperatures, it's not dissipating even a bit. So I guess that's my kind of opening gambit, starting as a proper maritimer, grousing about the weather. Doug, how are you doing today, my friend?
Good. I'm also experiencing similar weather, and we already lost our power once for the season because, some places have a third world power infrastructure.
Including certain locations within Prince Edward Island.
Yeah, basically. So I was grousing about that earlier this week. But otherwise, I'm good.
No, glad to hear it. Awesome. Folks, we had somewhat of a pre-recording chat about the sports hat that Dr. Doug is wearing. And Doug, perhaps you can share a bit of that, a bit of a recap on the accoutrements, on the very lit merchandise that you're sporting here, my friend.
Okay. Many moons ago, when my hair wasn't quite as white or gray, I played the top level hockey in my hometown. So ice hockey for the people that aren't Canadian. And before, when I was younger, it was a junior team, and then the junior team ended for some reason. So I was playing the minor hockey, but at the highest level. And then years later, they started the junior team again. And the hat is just the Truro Bearcats hat. And it's just a red hat with a big, very clear T. And it's the same font that the old Truro Daily News newspaper used to use. So it all just, my hometown, everything ties in together. And I had it for a while, and I thought I was having a giant forehead day, and normally I don't really care about my appearance that much. But I saw the hat, and it's like, oh, I've had it for a while. I'm wearing the hat. I really like it. It's still, I got a good shape and stuff. So it makes me feel good. So that's why you're seeing it today.
Repping Truro, Nova Scotia.
Yeah, the
hub every single way that we can. Yeah, that's awesome. Glad to hear it. Well, thanks for that, Doug. So I think actually this personal anecdote, if you will, leads us somewhat into the topic today on personal curricula. Gotta say, I was really interested in this. I mean, that may sound disingenuous. I'm always interested in the topics that you come up with, Doug. But personal curricula, in keeping with our ongoing exploration of lifelong learning, it's fair to say, I think in this case, could you just perhaps enlighten us a bit as to what motivated this particular topic at this particular time?
Sure, it was the social media algorithm. I in my algorithm, right? Like on my Instagram account, I have like 1,200 little videos of my dogs walking around in various places. And so when I go to log in, and there was a little the algorithm fed me this one influencer, I don't know, whoever she was, and she was talking about your personal curricula, and boy, you sure need a personal curricula. And then I thought, we just did an episode on self education, which is what lifelong learning was called before. Uh, and then we've done a bunch on lifelong learning. And now it's like, is personal curricula, is that just a new buzzword for what we've already been talking about? Or what is the situation here? So, because self education was on my brain, it was like, let's dig in. So that's what I did. That's why I wanted to take a look at it, just to see how different is it. Is it a buzzword or is it a real thing? And it apparently, this phrase has been around since at least the 1930s. So I wasn't aware of it. Maybe it was just niche, but that's where we're at. So that's what we're going to talk about.
Well, fantastic. And just as you were speaking to that, it didn't occur to me before. I prepared my own
Yeah.
notes. I've got the WordPress sort of set up for this, but one thing, just as you've been speaking to this, setting the context, is our notion of personal education infrastructure, PEI, which perhaps is more technology and instructional design centered in its conception. It was kind of a throwaway joke that I think if you actually delved into it a bit could particularly be legit. I'm always a sucker for a groovy acronym, and PEI just made me chuckle when we came up with that a couple of years ago, whatever it was. So as you were describing this influencer and your ruminations on the messaging, sort of puts me in the mind of the good old PEI that we copped on this show a couple of years back or whatever it is.
Yeah, that's very true.
And speaking of going back to the 1930s, I got to say, Doug, always impressed with the historical perspective, and I'm always impressed with the visuals. So, folks, you are definitely going to want to check out the WordPress, analogtrope.ca/podcast. And there is a case where we've married up, Doug has married up, that is, some very cool references from the earlier part of the 20th century, almost 100 years ago, but who's counting, and with some visuals of the era. So, Doug, if you wanted to maybe go down that rabbit hole with us a bit to get started.
Yes, thank you for that introduction. Normally, I try to stick to academic sources as much as I possibly can. And when I was looking around for personal curricula, the oldest thing I could find was from the University of Maine campus newspaper that came out in 1939. And what I really enjoyed was the author was Maine campus staff. That that's just what the author or the editor of the newspaper was. So this is March 13th, 39. And in campus chatter by Mimi. I don't know who Mimi is, but thanks for putting it together. One of the things Mimi posts is that 160 freshmen and sophomores at Gautier College follow no less than 114 different personal curricula. Now, what I think that actually is, I don't think that's what the influencer was talking about on my Instagram feed. I think this meant that this college had option courses or elective courses or take take one math course, take one English course, take one science course, take one classics course. I think that's what they were talking about, where everything wasn't lockstep. Because I've worked at places where you want to get this piece of paper, you must take each of these courses along with everybody else in your class. And you want an option course? We don't care. No, go do that on your own time. So I think that's what Mimi was talking about here. And I love the fact that I can actually use her first name because I have no clue what her last name is. I couldn't find any sources for that. And I really just enjoyed the concept of, okay, it's been around for a while. But what really sucked me into this article is an image that I shared as well in the notes that you can go take a look at if you're listening. And it's 6 pictures of the same gentleman holding up a phone, and it says, "You're in 6 places at once." And what it is it was an advertisement for conference telephone services. So it's, how do we conference call 6 people together? I've never seen an earlier reference to it than this. So what we're doing right now, yeah, like it got its start back in 1939, at least. It was being advertised in 1939. So when I saw that picture, it was like, oh, wow. And they've got the text of the ad. I really enjoyed. It's like, oh, boy, here's why you need to do it. I think anybody that's been on a Teams call for too long would disagree with some of the advertising copy, but one of those things.
That's where the creative Camtasia edit came into play, which I'm thinking already is going to involve Krampus. For those who partake in the Krampus festivities, we're recording this, not putting it up, but we're definitely recording it the day after Krampus night. I'm not going to go into all the depth of it, but boy, oh boy, do yourself a favor, or not, depending on your tolerance for the morbid and the strange. But I think this whole Halloween right around Christmas that the Northern European folks have with the Krampus festivities is something that we probably ought to be a little bit more conscientious of and celebrate perhaps a bit more here in North America. I could definitely get behind that every year. I think I'm gonna. So thanks to the social media algorithms that recognize that I'm kind of a weirdo and threw me all this Krampus messaging over the past couple days on the day of Krampus night, which was yesterday. So,
and I think we need to embrace celebration. I think
definitely.
That's something that is missing. So you're talking about Krampus. In a couple of weeks, I'm looking forward to Festivus. I most definitely want to celebrate Festivus.
Are you going to get an iron pole and have beats of strength around the Festivus pole?
I might have an iron pole now. Just maybe. I bought it for a project. So it's been sitting in my garage for like 2 years. And I think I've solved the project another way. But I collect stuff and then do the brainstorming to come up with solutions. So I don't know if I need the iron pole for that. So I can certainly use it for something else. So yeah, in feats of strength these days, yeah, that could be just.
If there's any millennials or Gen Zs who are unclear on what this whole Festivus phenomenon is, you got to check it out by going to your Seinfelds. You could just Google Seinfeld and Festivus. Actually, we're getting a bit esoteric, but I think it's still relevant. On the Ed Non-Tech podcast website, one of the little widgets on the landing page actually has Ed Tech for the rest of us. And it's all like teehee, we're the kind of irreverent show. But if anybody is a fan, as you probably should be, of Seinfeld circa mid-1990s and you're familiar with the Festivus phenomenon, you're going to know that George Costanza's father got so disgruntled with the commercialization and the fakeness of Christmas, he came up with his own holiday, Festivus. It was a Festivus for the rest of us. So I kind of, when I was putting that widget onto our page, I was like, tee hee, ed tech for the rest of us, like Festivus. Ha ha. So many nerdy rabbit holes that were going down here. I think in keeping with the frothy and heady celebrations which we're entering into. We're entering into the winter solstice, the Christmas, the New Year's, all the pre-Christian pagan rituals, to say nothing of Saturnalia, which the Romans would have celebrated, which we referenced on the previous episode. So there's quite a lot in this particular time of year over the years and the millennia. And I think marrying it up with the concept of technology and our personal pathways through curricula is certainly appropriate for this time of year.
And one other Festivus thing that we have embraced in the podcast is the airing of grievances. I'm pretty sure we have aired some grievances over the last 4 years, the last 4 seasons. So,
speaking as somebody who's gone over a fair amount of our episodes during the fall period, just over the past couple months, to kind of check on which of the videos needed perhaps some improvement in retrospect and tidying up dead links on the notes pages and the like, it brought me back to when we did the first year of the show. We actually did one of our episodes. We did like 3, if not 4, seasonally sort of themed episodes. And one of them, which Doug is referring to, perhaps at least indirectly, the 12 grievances of head tech, which that was 2022 we did that, so that may even be something we could potentially revisit here, in updating it or whatnot. Possibly not, but we've definitely explored the airing of grievances at some length. You could even say arguably that it's informed the conception of the show, taking on the ironic and somewhat, I don't want to say non-academic, because this show is actually really heavily academic, but it's a different way of dealing with academia. And I think that irreverent and ironic sort of approach that we tend to capitalize on and own a bit in the space is in keeping with the Festivus spirit generally, if I may, if it's not too
yeah,
much of a stretch.
no, that's not a reach. I agree with that, and we happily do it. So I assume our personalities both slide in that direction anyway, since it would just seem really natural to do.
Lots of overlap we find in this show. Again, in the pre-session, I discovered, I didn't know this before, that Doug also suffers from sleep apnea. I had a pretty significant sleep apnea attack last night, and my mom, we live in the same house, and she actually heard me having a coughing and choking apnea attack, and she was concerned about it. And I was like, yeah, it's like the Krampus demon was sitting on my chest, because last night was being Krampus night and whatnot, right? So I think, Doug, just to steer it back, are we ready to go to Dubois in 1972 at this point?
Yeah, we're okay. Sorry again.
I'm sure we're more than okay. Because, folks, that was another creative Camtasia edit. Camtasia edit. It's a bit like Wayne's World with the special effects that we're throwing in here. And I have somewhat of a background in public access television. I was a reporter for Rogers TV in my hometown of Fredericton when I was in my early 20s after my BA degree in English, and overlapping significantly with my time at the call center. And I was looking for something else to do, just something to feel culturally relevant, I suppose. And so back in the day, folks, millennials and Gen Zs, you want to throw yourself into a time when there was actually public, community based televised programming going on the regular. It was Rogers TV in Fredericton, and they actually had a former global or CTV newsman whose job it was to produce a daily, 4 times a week news show and using volunteer staff. And so I participated. I did that for about 2 years, once a week, and it was a ton of fun, ton of fun. And I didn't do any reporting per se. I would go to the legislature, and during the scrum, I was allowed to hold up a microphone, but I wasn't calling out questions. I was just catching the responses to the other questions. And then myself and the producer, we would shape the sound bites and the photography into a story. He would use the editing suite, and I would provide the narration and such. And again, before everybody and their dog had a podcast, this was a pretty hands-on and resource intensive, but still extremely fun and rewarding endeavor. So Wayne's World, with the trope of the basement sort of public access television, that's something, if you're Gen X, which Doug and I both represent from Gen X, that may sort of inform the sensibility that we're bringing to the show. If we can speak to that, if we can speak to personal ways through curricula and personalized ways of learning over the years and informal learning and the like, lifelong learning, as we tend to do, I think now we're going to go back to one of these situations where Doug was alive when this
Yeah.
last article was written, but I wasn't. So there's just a bit of a discrepancy there in our ages, even though we both do represent from the same generational cohort. Speaking to Dubois, 1972, from the Ontario Association of something something, because I can only see half of the screen on my tab. So why don't you tell us a little bit more about it, Doug?
This article by Dubois is about relevance of the curriculum from the Ontario Association for Curriculum Development annual conference. And they separated, they said the group considered that perhaps core curricula might have different procedures from those of enrichment or personal curricula. So in 1972, they identified that the core curricula from institutions is fundamentally different than personal curricula or the enrichment curricula. So it's, what do you enjoy doing? What are you learning? How is this enriching your life? Is so different from the come here, jump through the hoops, learn this stuff because you need it to get a piece of paper. There was two fundamentally different things, and that was more than 50 years ago that we were aware of that. And it was just really enjoyable to see that separation. So it was obvious 50 years ago that the way people achieve maturity in the regular conventional schooling is so different than the range of choice and responsibilities that they're taking in the rest of their life. It's like, why are we separating those two things? Why are we splitting up? Oh, that's enjoyable. That's enriching. That's teaching them something from, here's what's in the institution. Here's what the institution demands. And it was very neat to see Dubois actually phrase it that way. It was a nice article, and it wasn't that long, so it was a nice, enjoyable read. So I'm wondering your thoughts on that separation or the differentiation.
Well, part of what we're speaking to with this, my first thought with this particular reference actually is I appreciate seeing Canadian content in the references because Doug does an absolutely admirable job of going far and wide, historically and geographically. We've definitely pulled in references from the global discussion on education. But when we can have something like this that resonates from the Canadian post-secondary curricula development, I have a particular affinity because I worked in Ontario as an educational developer. Faculty development officer was the role at Ontario Tech University circa 2015 to 2018. And to me, that literature that we're citing here, that Doug has found, is part of what became the ongoing dialogue I participated in, going to conferences and participating in newsletter and article creation and the like within that area of practice, within that regional area of practice. So Canadians really do tend to, I think, punch above our weight when it comes to curriculum development studies, when it comes to distance education studies, I dare say. And I'm just pleased as punch to see that kind of piece from my historical trajectory indirectly kind of landing in here. I would also add that in terms of the distinction between the personal and the academic, when I was doing my doctoral work on these massive open courses, it really struck me that one of the negatives that was attributed to these courses was the low completion rates, were the unenforceable sort of academic framework that it's like, oh, well, it's just people of the public doing it for their own interest. But to me, that was actually a huge part of what made those courses interesting and compelling. And it probably, with those kinds of courses, opened up a lot of people to higher education that downstream they may have taken classes through a continuing ed or extended learning division or what have you. And that was something that I really tended to appreciate about my doctoral study in those kinds of courses, which, as far as it goes, overlapped with the time I was in Ontario. Now, Doug, you were doing a course that was being facilitated through Ontario Tech University pretty recently. Did you finish
Yes.
that up, or is that still going on, or what?
I think it might have wrapped up, but I'm still puttering through the material.
Gotcha.
Like,
See,
like
that
I,
speaks
I
somewhat to what I was just talking about in
yeah,
terms of
exactly.
finding their own way through the curricula.
Yeah, yeah. What I'm reading, I'm finding valuable, but it's finding the time. Like I have to make
Absolutely.
it fit into my life. So, yeah, like this, what they're presenting is amazing. It's so good, and it really helped me conceptualize some stuff that I was grappling with, and it was just really nice to see somebody else. And considering that Dr. Bill Hunter was the one that put it together, and I greatly respect him and his work. He's an A1 person on top of being an amazing educator. So it's like, yeah, let's head that way, see what's there. And I am still puttering through to see what's going on, but I have not been as active as I was hoping. But that's life. These things happen, and I don't beat myself up about that anymore. In the past, I used to, but I'm working on it, being a work in progress.
You've got a number of highly creative and engaging initiatives that I'm aware of, and probably various things going on that I don't. And I think an enlightened approach to education generally allows recognition of these kinds of pathways through various types of curricula. And
Yeah,
that's something, again, that by its very lived experience here, we're demonstrating with how this show is put together and presented. And pretty salient example here, Doug, as to your experience with that course. I
yeah,
wonder if that puts us somewhat in a relevant position to speak to the next reference, Petrina 1992, Curriculum Change in Technology Education, because we are speaking a bit to the technology aspect of it in as much as how these courses have been presented and how we are, in fact, delivering this podcast?
Short answer is yes. I was hoping to guide us there from your earlier comments. And one thing that Katrina comes up with is students are free to develop or are active in helping define their own curricula based on their personal problems, developmental levels, goals, interests, curiosities, capabilities, and needs, which is what I do now that I'm not trying to actively get another piece of paper. And one thing that Katrina lists is there's a couple of lists here in the notes. So if you want to go to the notes, they talk about participation, integration, relevance, the self, and goals, about why it matters. Why the participant needs to have a say in things. And I think things like co-creating rubrics, that is all the rage these days. I think that comes out of this type of thinking, right? It's how are we putting all our thinking, feeling, action? How are we putting together our objectives for learning? And I think it all comes from this kind of concept that Katrina is presenting there. And because we're the Ed Non-Tech podcast, and this is technology and education, there's a lot of stuff from the early 90s, which is awesome. Anybody that's doing like any sort of research, be it master's or PhD or EdDoc or whatever, there's another list here that Katrina presented. It's like inquiry into technology is integral to personal relevance curricula for the following reasons. And they list 9 reasons that are fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
And some of them are just technology is central to the human experience. And it's like, yeah, it really is. Because not very often people just live in caves anymore, right? Like the technology is putting it together, and technology shapes our perceptions of the world and ourselves. It's anytime you walk by a billboard, it's like they're basically meant to make you feel bad about yourself, right? You need to buy this or you need to buy that, right? Personal livelihoods dependent on technology, right? How could we do anything? Like we couldn't do this without the technology, and so on. So Katrina lists 9 things, and they're lovely. They would be a great starting place for somebody that's exploring the value of technology in education and in our lives. So I just want to put it out there. And they also include all the references, like Ormondson 1990, Rapp 89, Worth 87, Grasenberg 86. There's heaps of stuff there. It'd be a great place for somebody to start. If you were stumped and looking for something, that'd be a nice, gentle entry into the topics, which is why I included 2 lists, because normally I don't.
Absolutely fantastic stuff, Doug. And just as you're describing it, and I'm looking at those numbers there, perhaps for the first time in some amount of detail rather than kind of just copying and pasting them into the notes, I can't help but be reminded that perhaps some of these assertions that are implied within those numbers sort of undergird, if you will, the community of inquiry framework, the COI framework that I spent an awful lot of time with when I was doing my doctoral study, and particularly just in regards to the fact that the COI model really came into play, became apparent in the literature. Garrison and colleagues from University of, I think he was working for University of Alberta when he first started that research. It's Canadian model for sure.
It was, if it wasn't U of A, it was Athabasca, or it was University of Calgary. He
ended up at the University of Calgary himself,
yeah.
Garrison, and that's like I at the very end of his career, and that's where I first really worked on it. But it was circa 1999, 2000 is when the first COI articles showed up in the literature. And therefore, you're looking at references here from the 1990s and the 1980s and thereabouts. So all of that would have been in the error, so to speak, if not directly in the reference lists. So when I look at some of these points that are being raised, I think, yeah, this is really in alignment with, or it's really in sympathy with a lot of some of the comments and some of the thinking that I've encountered when looking at COI stuff through my doctoral study. So that's my kind of initial impressions of what you shared here with us, Doug, from this Petrina article.
Yeah, thanks. I'm glad that brought some stuff up because I really enjoyed it, and I knew you would have some interesting insights because you know so much more about COI than I do.
Well, that is kind of you. And I guess as far as the COI stuff goes, it's one of these things with your doctoral study. Those of you who might be thinking about doing the doctoral study, it's like it eats up maybe a half decade of your life, but then you step away from it. And so it's been forever. By forever, I mean since the last time we did some COI related episodes for the show, since I've had anything to do with that literature. And just the opportunity to go back and think, oh, yeah, okay, this kind of reminds me of something I was looking at 10 years ago or whatever. That to me is always a pleasure. I always just get the tingles. I get the reminiscences. I'm a middle aged dude, and anything that puts me in that nostalgic kind of mentality. Nostalgia is a comfortable feeling for me. I don't look at it as wallowing in the past. I just think, that was some nice times. That was some nice things that could have some conceivable relevance now, such as this particular setting and context, right? So,
And that's interesting to me because my PhD was more on. I was one of the original online learning researchers. So there was a lot of curriculum development, a lot of leadership, a lot of trying to figure out the online space. And so I never get away from my research, even though like I got my PhD more than 20 years ago now. So I'm constantly living in that worldview of even when we do this, it's like, okay, I'm always analyzing it based on my research to say, okay, what could we do better? What worked? What didn't? How did that come across? Could we have changed this to try something different? And so all that analysis constantly runs in my head. And whenever somebody said, oh, jeepers. I went to a session a week ago, and it was about here's all the great, interesting things that are just coming out of online learning, and here's what we learned, and here's what you need to take away from you. And I almost lost it in the session. And thankfully, my camera wasn't on, and thankfully, I was muted, and they were bringing up stuff that I referenced in my PhD 20 years ago, and they were seeing it as new. And all I wanted to scream is, read the damn literature. That is not new. Just because you didn't know it, that doesn't mean it's new. And I struggled with it. I was polite and I smiled when the camera was on me and stuff, but it was like, read the literature. This is crazy that you went into this big endeavor and put all the time and money into it, and you didn't read the literature to get the basics ready. So one of those things. I hadn't planned to talk about that, but there it is.
We are all about the personal context and situation. And as you were making your previous comments, Doug, I was thinking, yeah, it makes sense that Doug is kind of up on this stuff on the regular because without going into too much detail about your day job, you are involved in Canadian higher education right now. You're in that sector and you're working in the kind of curricular space where that kind of knowledge is directly applicable to what you do on a daily basis. Whereas with my professional context and setting, I've stepped in and out of various areas. I'm going to say it online now for the first time, I suppose, that I've recently gotten a job. I've been hired in a part time role with pretty significant hours associated with it. So 20 to 40 hours a week. And probably it's going to skew more towards the 40 side of it, working as an inclusive educator, facilitator with younger kids, K to 8. And it's putting me
Nice.
in special education, so to speak. I'm sure that's not the best term to use. We're going to call it maybe differentiated education. But in any case, it's going to involve students with behavioral and neurodiversities and social phenomena that have been completely, to me, outside of my area of practice. And it's with a non-governmental organization, a non-for-profit here in St. John. And it's really something I'm looking forward to a lot because it's just been completely outside of my mostly higher ed, mostly adult level career kind of stuff. And I have worked with younger students, Doug. I'm aware that you've worked with elementary age kids.
Yeah.
I haven't really since I was in South Korea. I did my first year and a quarter, year and a half of teaching at an ESL institute in South Korea, where I did work with the younger learners. And then when I did my B.Ed, it was with high school and middle school students. But since 2008, I've been working entirely in adult training and post secondary and the like until now. And I'm starting it on Monday, this new role. So to me, I'm looking at all of these aspects of curricula and training and development and teaching and learning that we've spoken to throughout the show. And I'm thinking, okay, this is going to be a new way to apply some of this in my setting. And conversely, to have that new setting inform what we talk about on this show and how we move things forward a bit. So again, appreciate the opportunity to speak to that here, Doug. I wasn't necessarily planning on mentioning all that myself, but here we are. It's a Krampus miracle, if you will, a
Well,
pre-Festivus miracle.
congratulations, man. That
Thank
is
you.
fantastic.
Appreciate it. Yeah.
Good
Thank you.
on you. I think you will have a good time and learn a lot, and I think those students will benefit.
I'm definitely
A
looking
great
forward
deal.
to it. Definitely looking forward to, well, as a parent, I mean, I just have an affinity and I think some insights into younger learners than what I did when I was 29, 28 years old, my first go round with it, a decade and a half plus later. And I just feel that at this point in my life, it's a really good fit. And I'm grateful to be in a situation where I don't have to go like a year and a half of being self-employed as I've had in the past. It was part of the impetus for this show, getting the show going in the first place. There's just a lot to it that I'm looking forward to. So appreciate the kind thoughts there, Doug, and appreciate having the opportunity to speak to it broadly as we go forward here. So I wonder, Doug, does that put us on to our next reference here yet or no?
Sawyer and Liggett, 2012.
Okie doke.
Shifting personalities. And they dig into all kinds of post-colonialism stuff that I don't normally dig into a whole lot. Maybe that's something I need to look at. But what they present, and again, we're trying to jump ahead. We're not in 39. We're not in the 1900s. We're definitely into the 2000s. And one thing they talk about is their personal curriculums and how the personal curriculum is in the shadow of the colonial socialization of people's lives. And it's like, oh, what a different way to look at it. Because what I want and what I'm interested in is really culturally situated. Right? I'm old enough now to have a mostly gray white beard. So what do I like? Oh, I like reading books about Tolkien. I like woodworking. I like walking my dogs. And it's like like that fits into the culture. And so a lot of my thoughts and my personal curricula fit in there. So they're looking at, what if you had a different socialization in your life? What if you were doing different stuff, or society imposed different things? Your interests would be different. So I'm just wondering your thoughts on that, because the way you've done some of your moving around the world. Like, I'm pretty sure in Qatar there was stuff you just couldn't do, right? Because you lived in a town, or you lived in I don't even know what you lived in, but one of those areas that are specific to your school.
Well, having lived in South Korea, followed by New Brunswick, and followed by Qatar, that whole trajectory circa 2006 to 2009, that was 3 countries in 3 years. And they were all completely different from each other. I think it certainly was formative in terms of how I've developed out of the gate as an educator, because that was at the very beginning of my career. And having shifted even between different regions of Canada, there's no different place from the rest of Canada than Alberta that I've experienced, at
Yeah, that's
least as
fair.
an adult. I'll even say that having lived for 6 months in Montreal after my undergrad, it was not as different from my experience of Canada as Alberta was within the past year and a half prior to coming back to New Brunswick. But putting that aside, I appreciate the opportunity to speak to those past experiences. Your discussion about things that you're interested in, Tolkien and middle-aged things that you're interested in. I mean, let's face it, Doug, you've probably been into Tolkien since you were a kid. Is that fair to
Oh
say?
yeah,
Since you
very
were a
fair.
younger person. So since moving back to New Brunswick, my mom has agreed for me to be able to stay where I am, and thus I don't have to have the immediate concerns of having a rent payment or utility payments or the like, at least for now. And so I've had the opportunity to restock my reading collection, which I used to collect a lot of vinyl and I hope to again someday, but I've kind of put that aside for now. But what I've gotten into now is I've started buying paperbacks on Amazon. And as much as I really am loath to help line Jeff Bezos' super yachts or the like, there's a lot wrong with that model, but it's kind of where we are. I have had the opportunity to just go, okay, I'm going to just binge on $20 paperbacks. And what I have here is Absolute Batman, the collected Batman of the rebooted story of Bruce Wayne, where he's not a billionaire and they completely revisit the characters and the whole lore from the ground up. And for me, it's a recent comic, and I'm like, okay, that's kind of how I actually feel a bit in my own life right now. Similar themes, similar tropes in my personal story, but being manifesting in a completely different manner due to my circumstances and point in my life. But further to that, I've also been revisiting, I should say, long-standing interest, long dormant interest in ancient Greek and Roman philosophy. And I gotta say, Doug, I've been enjoying this Cynic philosophers collection probably disproportionately. We talked in the last episode, folks, a bit about Diogenes of Sinope, the dog philosopher. The Cynics were actually known, as I'm starting to understand, they would refer to the followers even of this person as dogs. They would just say, oh, he's a dog in terms of how he carries himself, largely to do with their flouting of conventional norms. One thing that I'm coming up to just from the fragments of this guy's life that have sort of made their way into history, whether it's mythical or factual or a hybrid, is it appears that at one point, and I didn't know this until just this week when I was getting into the book, that Diogenes was taking a sea voyage, as was common in the day, towards the later part of his life. He was pretty far on in his years, and his ship was captured by pirates, and he got sold into slavery. He got sold into slavery. And I'm just going to read just a bit because the way that this is framed to me is just this from the sale of Diogenes. He told the auctioneer to give notice in the event anyone wanted to acquire a master for himself. So he said that his talent, when it was asked what he did, is he governs other people. He helps govern people. And basically, when he got sold into slavery, he pointed to somebody and he said, "You need a master. You need somebody to guide you." And this person, well appointed though he was, he made the purchase. He purchased Diogenes. And Diogenes, in his correspondence with friends later on, he said, "No, don't feel bad for me. It's like you don't feel bad for a lion. When a lion is being purchased and they're taking care of the lion, it's out of respect for the lion and what the lion can do." That is how he viewed his situation in slavery. And this guy ended up raising the children, and he was a much loved member of the household. And he talked back. He pushed back at his so-called master and completely upended that relationship because of his esteem and his reputation as a philosopher. So I think just even those kinds of insights into historical culture, I wasn't thinking in terms of historicity as much before I was in the show, because that, quite frankly, is something that Doug has brought to the show. And we've had some dogs barking in the background, and we've had some creative edits here. So I'm thinking, let's reference Diogenes the dog philosopher, because I'm just looking for an excuse to throw it in, and it seemed opportune at that moment. So thank you for that, Doug.
Oh, you're welcome, because that ties into our very last article, which is also our most recent article. It's Billet 2023, the personal curriculum concepts, intentions, and enactments. And one thing I find interesting with Billet is Billet presented the actual definition, where the word came from, because I'm fascinated by how did we get to this word. And it's like the word curriculum originally refers to the course or progress along or the pathway to follow. So in the Latin, curre means to run or to proceed. So that's where curriculum originally comes from. And then Billet goes on later to say awkward, unhelpful, and erroneous concepts such as informal, non-formal learning have entered and become established within the global educational lexicon. And that's so true. It's where PLAR, like credentialed prior learning, or CPL, or prior learning assessment, all comes from. It's like, just because you weren't jumping through hoops at an institution didn't mean you didn't learn, and didn't mean that informal is less than whatever we're doing here. And it's the amount of stuff I've learned outside of class is so much greater than what I've learned inside of class. And I just wanted to tie that back to the ancient Romans, and you very nicely dropped the dog philosopher in there, Diogenes. I've never known. I've never heard it out loud. It's one of those words I've read and I know what the word is, but I don't know how to pronounce it.
You say tomato, I say tomato. And my real interest in Diogenes was, I'm really just endlessly fascinated by Socrates, but Socrates didn't actually write anything down. We only have his doctrines through Plato, Xenophon, and a whole bunch of other writers whose work no longer survives. So you have this person who definitely lived and who definitely left a historical impression, but the interpretation and how we know about him has been transmitted through others with their own narratives and their own agendas that are being put onto it. Well, this Diogenes, Diogenes, whatever fella, the dog philosopher, he basically ingratiated himself with one of Socrates' followers, original followers, whose work did not survive. And when he actually came a bit into rivalry with Plato because they were contemporaries, and Plato said of Diogenes, he reminds me of Socrates, but with a screw loose. And I'm
Nice.
like, that is awesome. And again, this is just the kind of lore that accumulates. I mean, you don't actually know if that was really a thing that got said or whatever at the time, but if it's not factual, it sure as heck is entertaining. And it is truthful of Plutarch or whomever happened to record the insight years and years later, right? So I am just grateful here because for me, he Diogenes is a link to Epictetus, who is a link to Marcus Aurelius, and part of my trajectory through this show, my informal learning, if you will, has been taking up meditations of Marcus Aurelius and really getting into it. And now I'm at the point where I'm just going further and further back and trying to find out the background culture. And I'm finding some very worthwhile rabbit holes. And such rabbit holes might be, if I want to speak to the place that we used to work that we kind of throw around sometimes together, one of the positive aspects of that endeavor, of that whole place, was the PLAR profile, prior
Yeah.
learning assessment recognition.
Yes.
That to me was something that was, I don't know how well they did it, but they gave it a lot of scope. It seemed they recognized its importance within the institution we were both at. And the person who was ostensibly in charge of that profile was a pretty legit, serious person. So there we go. I'm even saying nice things about that place that we used to work. It doesn't always happen, but there we go. Right. So that's kind of what you're throwing me in the mind of here, Doug, with that last reference.
Yeah. In Australia, it was called credential prior learning, so CPL.
Okay.
So when I came back to Canada and they were talking about PLAR, it's like, okay, here's a new acronym that I need to learn. But I just see it as so valuable. I love when people can test out of things. It's like,
absolutely,
yeah, because I have a buddy that was in the military for 20 years, and he was a chief electrician. He taught other people in the military how to do electrical stuff. And then when he retired, they made him start at the beginning. Like he had to start in a year one apprenticeship kind of program, because to get your red seal, it takes 4 years basically of solid whatever. And so the first day, the instructor gave them an assignment, and he came back in like 8 minutes, 12 minutes, something like that. Here you go, it's done. And the instructor was like, whoa, that's supposed to take you 3 weeks. And it was just one of those things. It's like, let me test out, right? Just let me test out. I have thousands upon thousands of hours of experience, but it's one of those things. Every place has its own way to do things. So, and he wasn't upset about it. He's like, there is some stuff I learned about how to wire houses and buildings that I never needed to know when I was wiring jets and helicopters. So that's there. But I also love PLAR. Maybe we should do a PLAR episode sometime.
Maybe so. Anything that provides alternate and multiple pathways, anything that reduces red tape, anything that increases efficiency, anything that gives agency to learners and recognizes them as individuals with whole narratives and lives and settings that have followed them into the present moment. Anything that can give that some formal recognition and help people move forward in their own trajectory through the hoops of academia and administrivia, all of that I think is to the good. So you're the topics fella, so maybe that's something to set us up for somewhere in 2026, Doug.
Your comments right there just led us to one of the images I wanted to share.
Fantastic. So folks, you do want to visit the website, you do want to check the notes. There are some outstanding visuals. And in fact, through the magic of Camtasia, we're going to place those into this very video clip starting right now. So, Doug, which visual do you want to speak to here to begin with?
There was a sticky note that says, "Get out of the learner's way." And I was working with a group of people, and we were developing a program in a hurry. And they were all educators. They were all career educators, but they'd never developed curriculum like this before. And so they were writing down my little comments. And one of them, apparently at one point, I just said, "Get out of the learner's way." And they wrote that down. That mattered. And that was something they used as a touchstone to come back to and come back to and come back to. So I took a picture of the sticky note that was on somebody's desk because I'm like, "What's this? Boy, that seems really clever. How come you got that written there?" And they're like, "That was you." And I'm like, "Really? Oh, okay." Then they made fun of me because I didn't remember saying it, but it's like, I say tons of stuff. And it was just, this personal curricula doesn't let other people get in their way, right? There's no hoop to jump through. There's no educator. There's no administrator. There possibly is, but this is about finding your own path and your own journey. So that's why I really like it. And the fact that it was written with caring and consideration, that they thought it was important enough to write down, because it's not often that people write a whole bunch of stuff down that I say. So I just really like that one.
So I can see why you like it. And I tend to agree that there's a lot packed into a very simple and effective visual there. I might now, in my estimation of what we have in the notes, there's two of them that I would speak to. The first of which is this really interesting linear / non-linear graphic where it starts out A to B is a straight line as representative of learning, but then it's really not how learning tends to work effectively. And so then you have a much more complex, I don't know much about science, but maybe mitochondria looking line, cellular structure of some kind, a little bit more of a complex annotated pathway that's contrasted with the straight A to B line. And I just really enjoyed the representation there and some of the notes. I wonder what you were thinking of, or if you had any particular affinity or comments on that one, Doug.
I saved this years ago, and as I was going through my digital clutter to find these images, I knew you would like this one. After 4 seasons of doing this, I knew this is an image that would get your attention. And the original part of it, the A to B that robs you of experience, to me is every time I was in a class and I had to learn something, and then I took the test, and then I immediately forgot whatever that information was. I memorized it for the test, and then I was done with it. That's great. But the second part of the image, which is here's the mistakes and the struggles and the surprises and everything else, that's where the learning is. It's the amount of stuff I have learned the hard way through all the struggles, but I learned it. Like I didn't know it for a particular test. I freaking learned it, and I'll know that forever. So I really like the second path. The first one might get you a piece of paper quicker, but the second one sticks with you. That's what I'm all about. I'm all about learning to enrich my life, not necessarily just to get a piece of paper.
The Long and Winding Road, to speak to a song by a little garage band called the Beatles. So I think also, Doug, if I may, first of all, I appreciate everything you just said about that. I always like it when you throw some Calvin and Hobbes in the notes.
Yeah.
We do have some Calvin and Hobbes, and it's just one frame. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it gets decidedly existential. And folks, I don't recommend following my Instagram because it's pretty nonsensical and eclectic, but I've been in the habit lately of following weird stuff to do with cartoon strips, Garfield, Peanuts, a lot of Garfield. God, a lot of Garfield. A lot of Garfield in my Instagram. Speaking of informal learning through technology, but there's also a whole lot of Calvin and Hobbes related accounts. And so just that one little bit of Calvin and Hobbes where he's having a rumination about existential crises and assessment of learning, I'm like, you bet your life. So appreciate you throwing that one in, Doug.
And there is one there that has nothing to do with our topic, but has everything to do with the weather that we discussed at the beginning of the episode. So that's all I've got for images. Hopefully people will go to the website, take a look, analogtropes.ca/podcast, and take a look at some of them. They're cute. And I had them all sitting on my computer someplace. So all I've got left is the word, question, and the phrases of the podcast.
Perfect.
So word of the podcast is curricula, because that's what this is about. It's whatever our journey is, whatever path we're trying to take, and formal, informal, whatever, right? It's about learning. Question of the podcast: how can we determine the value of self-education, lifelong learning, and personal curricula? I know CPL and PLAR are two ways, but what else is there? Like, can we just enjoy learning for learning's sake? Why do we have to produce something? Which I know goes against my social constructionist leanings, but that's also where I'm at.
But nor are they mutually exclusive. So there's that part of it too. Yeah.
And there's that part of it too. So if any of our listeners want to drop us a line and let us know, happy to have that conversation. Awesome. 2 phrases of the podcast, both of them are yours. Ruminations on the messaging. You said that really early on, and it's like, oh, that's like a literary phrase that I grapple with. I'd love to be able to talk like that, but I love the way you use that. And then finally, the other phrase of the podcast is with a screw loose, because I think that really suits us some days.
Fantastic. Well, the first instance there is really my English teacher bent and my literary nerd kind of bent. And with a screw loose, I mean, I think that's something that is applicable in all kinds of ways. And within the context of our ed tech, ed non-tech endeavor, I just was tickled when I saw the analogy where Plato, right? He's this esteemed philosopher, but hearing about him as this kind of guy who's running up against the dog philosopher Diogenes, and he's got a respect for the guy, but he also recognizes that he completely flouts convention and lives sort of like a homeless weirdo, sort of, not to be plain about it. And like Socrates with a screw loose, like, yeah, that made me chuckle. So I'm glad that those resonated here for us, Doug, on the phrases of the podcast.
It didn't just make me chuckle. It's like, okay, so they had screws back then, and people understood the concept. Because I need to go find out when screws got invented.
The history of the screw. Yeah, exactly.
It's going to need to happen. So
fantastic.
Thank you for that.
My pleasure. And thank you for that, Doug. Well, folks, I think this does put us towards the end of the show. Is there anything else we wanted to throw out here, Doug?
No, I hope you survived the cold weather snap, and congrats again on the new job. It sounds really exciting.
Yeah, appreciate it. I'm looking forward to it a lot. Take care, everybody. Hope you're staying warm. Hope you're staying safe wherever you are. I'm sure we'll be seeing you at least once more before the end of the year with this here podcast. So until then, bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.